Welcome to the second session of the conference, which focuses on clean sport, tackling doping, match fixing, and illegal betting. As you all know, this phenomena not only corrupt sport, but they also pose major public health risk and help to enrich organized criminal groups on a transnational level. There are more than 700 sports and disciplines open to betting all over the world. The sports sector is dependent on the gambling sector because of major sponsorship investments. However, online betting is a significant risk factor for developing dangerous forms of addiction, particularly among young people and athletes. The Committee on Culture and Committee on Social Affairs of the Council of Europe, as some of you may know, held a joint hearing on this issue last June. And we have to add furthermore that there is a clear link between the manipulation of sports competition and gambling, particularly illegal betting. Just consider the market size that for this is really colossal. 230 billion in Europe and 1,000 billion in Asia. To combat this global issue, new forms of multi-stakeholder cooperation at the international level are essential. Coming to doping, also doping is still a problem. More cases of proven doping by high-level athletes continue to emerge. The challenge to keep sports clean has evolved against a backdrop of new substances and methods designed to boost athletic performance while violating the rules and spirit of the competition. We must rise to the challenge and preserve fair play. However, we should not overlook the invasive nature of testing and that athletes' rights are at stake. So as always in the Council of Europe, we face a balancing of important human rights. Are we protecting them effectively? Genetic testing, for example, also called for a discussion on the limits that we should set to preserve their fundamental rights. What it is even more worrying to me is that doping is spreading and taking root in leisure and amateur sport, endangering thousands of young people and poisoning them. Do we have the policies and the right legal framework to combat this phenomena? What can we do to strengthen international cooperation and ensure that all actors involved apply the rules and regulation effectively and without exception? This would increase trust in the system. The Council of Europe and its Assembly are fully committed to working closely with WADA as well as with the IOC and the International Sport Federation to preserve human rights, fair play and integrity in sports competition. Our panelists today will help us discuss how sport and public authorities are reacting, how they can join efforts to deal with this issue more effectively, and better exploit the potential for mutual supports to create more robust and trustworthy anti-corruption and anti-doping systems. The session will be structured around two panels to be followed by a last part where the floor will be open for exchanges with the audience. We will now proceed to the first panel that refers to understanding the problem and its extent, old and new challenges. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our panelists, and I would kindly remind them to limit their presentation. We are back to the time of 7 minutes, so we don't have the constraint we had at the end of the morning, but we have to stay to the 7 minutes. They will then have the opportunity to engage in a dynamic exchange with the audience following their presentation that will come, as mentioned, at the end of the two panels. If a speaker exceeds the allowed time, I will have to stop them by giving with this mechanism that we have seen before the end of the speak. Our first speaker is George Mavrotas. George is the chair of the Macolin Convention Follow-up Committee and Secretary General of Sport in Greece, a former water polo Olympian in 1984-2000 with 511 caps. George was previously a member of the Hellenic Parliament and our Parliamentary Assembly in the Council of Europe. He has been an instrumental champion to the promotion of the Macolin Convention and currently the only international legal standard to regulate the fight against the manipulation of sport competition. George, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and the Hellenic Parliament for giving us the opportunity to discuss such important topics for sport in such a symbolic place. My 7 minutes presentation will be about manipulation of sport competitions, the Macolin Convention. We will start with sport integrity, then we will pass to manipulation of sport competitions, the Macolin Convention, the challenges for the future of match fixing, and some conclusions at the end. Sport integrity is very high in the sport agenda of intergovernmental organizations and for the sport movement. There are 5 recognized areas according to the Kazan Action Plan of UNESCO: spectator safety and security, preventing harassment and abuse that we have already heard in the first session, fostering good governance, combating manipulation of sport competitions, and combating doping. We will discuss about combating manipulation of sport competitions and why is this a problem? Because manipulation of sport competitions ruins the essence of sport. It has various incentives, mainly betting and online betting, and the last years that is approachable almost to everybody, and we can bet almost to everything. This magnifies the threat. For the organized crime, it is a low-risk, high-profit activity, and it is true that the sport movement cannot deal alone with this problem. What we have to do? According to the methodology to all these problems, we have prevention and suppression. Regarding prevention, which is very important, we have education and awareness raising. And regarding suppression, we have to do with analysis, intelligence, investigation, and sanctions. And the only way to effectively do both is through collaboration. National collaboration within the countries, state, sport movement, law enforcement, and betting ecosystem, and international cooperation with the governmental organizations that we need a framework and a network to work with. Who will do it? The Council of Europe. We are the most influential intergovernmental organization regarding sport. This is where the government and sport movement are made to solve relevant problems like match fixing, a problem hard to detect and prove in criminal and disciplinary procedures. So joining forces, government and sport movement can effectively tackle match fixing. And Macolin Convention provides this collaborative framework. How? The Macolin Convention of the Council of Europe is the only international binding instrument dedicated to manipulation of sport competitions, provide common definitions and basic concepts, and promote national and international cooperation. It covers all phases: prevention, detection, and sanctioning, and has measures for all the relevant stakeholders. And of course, it is aligned with the Council of Europe values: human rights, rule of law, and democracy. The Macolin Convention came into force in 1st September of 2019. 12 countries have already ratified the convention, and 41 countries have signed the convention. The convention is open also to countries outside Europe, and as the moment we are speaking, we have connections and discussions with countries like Brazil, Japan, or Mexico in order to have this convention in their, let's say, arsenal against match fixing. Assume that this is the, let's say, the set of the betting activities in the whole world. this is the set of the sport activities in the world. They have a common subset, the subset of sport betting, but within betting we have also a subset of illegal betting, and we have a very, let's say, an area that is the illegal sport betting. The sport manipulation happened in this, let's say, region that has to do also with illegal sport betting, but also with legal sport betting and without betting at all. So our aim is to shrink the sport manipulation area, and the means are the framework, the network, the technology, the cooperation, and the education that we have to develop. This is, let's say, the timeline of the Macaulay Convention ratifications. You can see we started with Norway, then Portugal, Ukraine, Italy, Switzerland, and Moldova, then Greece, Iceland, and France. And in 2024, it is Belgium, Lithuania, and Spain that have ratified the convention. And if you don't see your country in this chart, you have to ask yourselves why my country has not ratified yet the Macaulay Convention, and put some pressure in your governments in order to be aboard. The more we are, the stronger we are. So the lessons learned, no one can solve the problem alone. We need this kind of synergies. The framework and the network are critical. It is important to have whistleblowing mechanism and law enforcement authorities with relevant expertise. The criminal and the disciplinary procedures are complementary, and we have to exploit the technology, business analytics, big data analysis, e-learning, and so on. And of course, rules for betting. Illegal betting has to be tackled. We have to apply reasonable betting and responsible betting. And because the convention is a living organism, decisions need to be taken for moving forward, so strategic decisions are taken in the follow-up committee level. And we need more countries to participate in the strategic decision-making. The countries that have ratified the convention, they are the countries that participate in the follow-up committee. Regarding EU, we have, let's say, after 10 years of stagnation, the things, as we saw in the chart, are going better. It's a matter of political will to overcome these obstacles. There are no legal obstacles anymore. 7 out of 12 member states are now EU members, and it's time to move forward. So the Macaulay Convention is a Council of Europe Convention, which is open to member states from other continents. Globalization is important in order to tackle a global problem, and we need this kind of common framework. And my last slide, Mr. Chair. Manipulation of sport competition is a critical threat, a global problem surpassing national frontiers. Macaulay Convention is the only relevant legally binding tool. It is more sport-oriented, protecting values, than betting-oriented, protecting profits, and provides the framework and the network in order to be effective. The top challenges are more ratifications for the convention and development of effective international tools. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, George. Your intervention was very useful in order to better understanding how to tackle manipulation, and of course the special regard to the Macaulay Convention of the Council of Europe, also understanding the different approach of the different countries. So now we will give the floor to our second speaker, Angelo Rigoropoulos. With a background in law, sport law and management, Angelo has worked with UEFA since 2010. In his current capacity of Managing Director of the Integrity and Regulatory Division, Angelo oversees the disciplinary services, statutory and regulatory anti-match fixing unit. So the floor is to Angelo.
Thank you very much. Dear Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe, dear members of the Parliamentary Assembly, dear colleagues, it's really an honor for me to be here and represent UEFA in such important occasion and with such important talks. We heard at the opening of the session by the Chair that doping and anti-match fixing are phenomena that destroy not only the essence of sport, but also pose a risk to public health. I could not agree more to that. Since many years now, the fight against this phenomena has been priority number one for UEFA and generally for football governing bodies. When it comes to doping, thankfully, football is not between the sports mostly affected, and probably this is due to the solid educational program and frequent testing, at least at professional level. In amateur football, the risk of doping is greater. Whilst there is no systematic doping, the desire to make it a professional career, achieve personal success is very high. The dream of achieving professional contract can be a very important factor, including the economical aspect, that brings youth football players into temptation. Youth players may use supplements that can be contaminated also, and therefore the intake of prohibited substances can also be made unknowingly. Steroids and stimulants to improve strength and endurance are another factor. Moreover, let's not forget that teenagers nowadays are exposed to recreational drugs, cocaine, marijuana, for instance. Without education, amateur players do not understand the health risk and long-term consequences caused by the use of doping substances. To come back now to professional football, the pressure to perform, recover quickly from injuries, and maintain a top physical condition are the factors that lead players to make use of substances such as anabolic steroids, stimulants, and EPO. Access to doping, nevertheless, is more difficult, as I said before, given the high number of tests to which professional players are exposed and the possible consequences that they might face. I'm not only talking about long-term suspensions, but also fines and reputational damages. As mentioned in my opening, like match fixing, anything that has to do with integrity, therefore doping as well, is a top priority for UEFA, and we have a zero-tolerance approach. Doping involving players participating in UEFA competition is very limited. Players may be tested by UEFA, FIFA, or by their respective NADOs. This leads to being 365 days under control in and out of competition. To reach good results, it took us some time. It was during the beginning of the 80s when we started testing, and only in the 90s, testing became systematic and mandatory. From 2010, so we're not talking far away, there has been a massive evolution of the new technologies to detect doping, in particular with the introduction of the biological passport for football players. Moreover, there has been attention at ensuring compliance of anti-doping not only by players, but also by the team staff. At national association level, however, things are very different, as there are more challenges. Such challenges are linked to financial constraints, doping, of course, and tests can be very expensive, inconsistent testing frequency, therefore lack of regular testing, especially out of competition, different cultural approach towards doping, lack of proper education and prevention programs, undue pressure and interference in anti-doping activities, or even conflict of interest when dealing with potential sanction. This is just to name few of the challenges. As you can understand, therefore yourself, there is still a lot to do. Despite the existence of WADA international standards, which set common approach to be applied at global level, the availability of new testing technologies and practices, more focus on education and awareness, as well as stricter sanctions, which all of these can be positive elements that help tackling doping, there are still quite some challenges. Factors such as new doping methods, attempting to evade detection, difficulty in aligning in the culture towards doping at global level, presence, as I mentioned before, of recreational drugs use, and the wide availability of banned substances in gyms, along with the culture of perfect body image that exists, and the social media are some of these threats. What can be done more? Education, education, education. Lawmakers shall ensure that the first contact with an anti-doping officer for a football player is not during a test, but rather that the player has received sufficient education before. Is it, for instance, an option to ensure that physical activity classes in school are also accompanied with first element of sensibilization to doping? I believe yes. Outside sports, which has its own disciplinary system coordinated through the UADA code, shouldn't there be a unified approach also in terms of criminalizing anti-doping, whether it's the use or the distribution of substances? I believe yes. Countries, through their legislators, have the duty to protect public health. Shouldn't therefore be a better control on the wide availability and commercialization of banned substances? Here again, I'm sure yes. To conclude, better and mandatory education on the one hand and harmonized EU laws when it comes to elevating doping as a crime, as well as better control of available banned substances in the market on the other hand, could benefit not only football, but also other sports. Thank you for your attention. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Thank you for giving us the framework of what happens in professional and amateur football, which, as we know, it has very serious doping issues. So this was a very useful contribution. And now the next guest is Jan C.G. Andersen. Jan is an award-winning journalist and the founder and international director of Play the Game, a very well-known initiative promoting ethics, democracy, and transparency in sport. So I give the floor to Jan Serger.
Thank you very much for the nice try to pronounce my name, Jens Sejer Andersen. Thank you very much for allowing me to discuss sport and democracy in a country where those two notions were actually invented. It's a special pleasure for an organization that had always worked to make democracy more sportive and sport more democratic. I'm not going to tell about how sport can contribute to solving the crisis of Western-style democracy. That's for another occasion, but I could say that the European model of sport that we often refer to is certainly also under pressure. We are facing challenges of a terrifying magnitude. These are not my words. These were the words of Thomas Bach, now IOC president for some time yet, when he ascended the throne of German sport back in 2006. And I dare say that the challenges have not become smaller since then. When, for instance, the European ministers responsible for sport met a few weeks ago in Porto to celebrate the Macolin Convention in its first 10 years, we heard how the illegal gambling industry is abusing sport in many different ways. Sport and betting are now linked directly and indirectly to slavery-like work camps, human trafficking, dubious sponsorships, cryptocurrency transactions, AI-enforced gambling, addiction, tax evasion, money laundering, and a few other very juicy issues. I wish I could say sport was an innocent victim of abuse, but the fact is that a lot of professional clubs are gladly accepting sponsorships by unregulated betting companies, and thereby they contribute to selling the image of the clubs, the credibility of the clubs, the love of their fans, to organized crime in a $1 trillion business. I hope it's against good payment. Over the past decade, a new dimension has been added to the opaque industry of sport. As Mr. Roussopoulos warned this morning, authoritarian states are now investing unprecedented fortunes in sport, buying up not only clubs and players, but whole tournaments and even sports organizations. Does anyone believe that our democratic societies will be strengthened by this interest from autocrats in taking over our cultural treasures once rooted in Europe? As for sports' internal governance and democracy, does anyone believe it will remain intact, confronted with so tempting financial perspectives offered by now very strong geopolitical actors? I fear we will increasingly see the already troubled governance of sport further undermined by infiltration of organized crime and of powerful state interests with no care whatsoever for the democratic and educational value of sport. The Council of Europe has for years been at the forefront, not only in raising awareness about these challenges, but also countering them at an operational level through, for instance, the Macolin Convention and the new mass network of state prosecutors. The International Partnership Against Corruption in Sport, also inspired very much by the Council of Europe, has taken some good steps issuing standards and recommendations, but we are very far from translating the paperwork into reality. What we need is binding rules and regulation and legislation, and above all, resources for enforcement of legislation. And that is where I could see a role for the new Interparliamentary Alliance for Good Governance and Integrity in Sport. You can make laws and you can set resources aside to actually implement these laws. I would like to point to two other possible priorities for such an alliance. One is an international renegotiation of the concept of autonomy of sport. Association freedom is indeed a fundamental right, but it should be reserved for true amateur associations. Many international sports organizations are associations by legal status, but in reality they are also multinational monopolies in the global entertainment industry. They should be regulated by, like all other industries, but they are not. To this day, the political strategy has been to leave it to sport itself to clean up in its own ranks. That strategy of self-regulation has failed big time. This is shown, among others, by the very number of prominent Olympic leaders that were claimed by sport but brought to justice by public prosecutors over the past 10 to 15 years. Not to mention those sports leaders who were caught in the act but never sanctioned. Sport receives generous public subsidies directly and indirectly, but very few democracies today link their public support to proven good governance. An alliance among parliamentarians could work to create common standards in that respect. The Deputy Secretary General, Bjørn Berge, this morning called for new proposals. Allow me to share one. Facing the growing systemic and international threats to the integrity of sport and to the role sport can play to promote democracy, Play the Game is currently working on a proposal to counter those threats. Together with an advisory group of some of the world's best and most experienced experts in sports crime and corruption, led by Gill Warners, by the way, we are preparing the launch of a project called Clearing Sport early next year. We will present a proposal for an overall international body that can build on the best of the already existing initiatives and fill the gaps where today's efforts are insufficient. The basic idea is to secure more enforcement of rules and principles that are already defined in so many resolutions and recommendations and charters. The lack of enforcement today comes at enormous financial costs and, more important, at great human costs, and we should not continue to accept those costs. Thank you.
So thank you, Jan, to also having given us the point of view of Play the Game and also providing some very interesting proposal that will follow us, Council of Europe. And then with this we have concluded the first part of our discussion. So thank you, George, Angelo, and Yen for your meaningful contribution to this discussion. As mentioned, we will have time for ask some questions at the end of the second part of our panels. So we will now move to the second one, which is about the responses to threats, safeguarding the integrity of sports competition while protecting human rights. So to explore this topic, we have with us today Alexandre Hastings. Alexandre is the attaché in Education, Youth, Culture and Sport to the Luxembourg Permanent Representation to the European Union. and is also advisor on international and European affairs for the Luxembourg Ministry of Sports. Alexander's ample experience is complemented by his role as chair of the Council of Europe Enlarged Partial Agreement on Sports and of the ad hoc European Committee for the World Anti-Doping Agency. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First, I would like to thank the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and the Hellenic Parliament for their invitation and also for choosing such an ambitious theme for this conference, and in particular for this session, which will allow me to say a few words as chair of EPAS, the Enlarged Partial Agreement on Sports, on what we do at EPAS. Safeguarding the integrity of sporting competition while protecting human rights is a very complex challenge because it involves a multitude of interests and stakeholders that may appear at first sight to be contradictory. For example, the fight against doping is based on strict rules to guarantee the fairness of sporting competitions. But these rules may seem invasive in terms of athletes' right to privacy or dignity or use of personal health data. The fight against sport manipulation involves the surveillance of communication, financial files or social networks of athletes and officials that may also raise questions about their right to privacy. The protection of athletes from all forms of abuse and violence in sport, which is based on very swift sanctions, may also question the right to a fair trial and the presumption of innocence. The issue of transgender athletes' participation in sporting competitions raised questions between sporting fairness and non-discrimination principle. I could have mentioned the athletes' right to physical and mental well-being, which is questioned by the overcrowding of sporting calendars, etc., etc., etc. These are just few examples. So to address this complexity and the diversity of stakeholders involved in sport, and to ensure that sport is always based on values and respect for the law and human rights, the Council of Europe has established in 2007 the EPAS. The Council of Europe was clearly the ideal place to promote human rights also in sport. EPAS has become the only platform bringing together in the same place, in the same organization, 41 public authorities and 30 sport organizations, NGOs and civil society stakeholders, just to promote sport policies that respect the fundamental values of the Council of Europe. Since its creation, EPAS has constantly promoted fair play, protection of athletes' rights, and defended values in sport and the integrity of sporting competitions. Among the actions of EPAS that I could or that I should mention, there are many declarations on sport integrity. We initiated the famous Convention of Macolin in EPAS. We drafted many recommendations. We organized many seminars, conferences, and so on integrity in sport. We also have a safe sport pool of experts to exchange criminal records, etc., etc., etc. But because of the speaking time, which is unfortunately limited, I would only focus on a very specific and recent EPAS initiative, namely the creation of Mars Network in 2022. The Mars Network, which stands for Network for Magistrates, Prosecutors Responsible for Sport, currently brings together 35 EPAS members countries, including Greece, represented by magistrates of the national judicial system, plus 8 guest countries, and among them, some of them that are not EPAS members, including the USA, 4 institutional observers, including Interpol, and 3 observers from the Council of Europe, Cybercrime, Greco, and Moneyval. The creation of Mars Network is a holistic and cross-border response to the growing concern and threats of manipulation of sporting competitions and all other forms of violence and corruption in sport. And it's also a response to the lack of expertise in a worldwide cross-border problem, and that needs to a coordination in a sector which we should admit often is considered of little importance by the judicial authorities. I'm not going to list the 5 objectives behind the creation of Mars. They are available on the Council of Europe website. Broadly speaking, it's a network for exchanging and sharing experience and best practice. Concretely, coming back to the title of this session, Mars is really an asset for safeguarding integrity in sport, but also for protecting human rights, because it's a group of legal experts with a solid knowledge and expertise in criminal law and procedural law, and who can then base their decision on a solid corpus of human rights principles, such as the European Convention on Human Rights and other conventions that have been mentioned by Director Schockenbrook, but also based on the 3 Sport Convention and many recommendations and so on. And they can also benefit from the expertise of all the institutional partners that I already mentioned, cybercrime, Greco, and Moneval. Mars Network has already held 3 meetings. The last one was in Lyon at Interpol headquarters. Now Mars is working on drawing up some national profiles, let's say a kind of a national fact sheet on the existing national legal framework for combating six different sport-related crimes. Therefore, Mars Network has helped to strengthen cross-border cooperation and has also developed expertise to magistrates and prosecutors. So Mars Network is really now recognized internationally as a key player in the fight against sport-related crime, and its collaboration with various international organizations such as Interpol and Europol has enhanced its reputation and effectiveness. So we are looking for tomorrow, and we must keep working. So we must encourage many countries which are in the room and not already members of EPAS to join this fabulous adventure of EPAS. We must train all the prosecutors in the countries that are not really aware about the dimension of crime in the sports sector. So just to conclude, I hope that I have succeeded in demonstrating EPA's ongoing concern and achievement to ensure the safeguarding of integrity in sport and the protection of human rights. And just to quote an athlete who said this morning that sport has the power to change the people, so let's not miss this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander, also for having underlined the importance of national and international cooperation and cross-border working and the role of EPAS. Now our next speaker is Anders Solheim. Anders is the CEO of Anti-Doping Norway since 2003 and the current chair of INADO. He has in past chaired key anti-doping initiatives, including the monitoring group of the Council of Europe Anti-Doping Convention. So the floor is yours for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much for being invited to speak here with you, for you. What is the sports sector? It is voluntary activity and collaboration, which is important for many local communities. But it is also international events proudly displaying the flag and the nation. The state honors its winners. But sport is also becoming more and more professionalized, and it has become an economic factor and a billion-dollar industry, with TV rights, sponsors, professional athletes, and major events. Human rights should protect all citizens who are involved in sport as well. Freedom of association is the cornerstone of sports. This is a rationale for the autonomy of sport and sports self-governance, including its own institutions, such as a court of arbitration for sport. Sport gives status, power, and fame. But sport is not free from the dark side. greed, corruption, bribery, threats, abuse of power, and doping. The anti-doping area is perhaps the field where it became clearly already 40 years ago that sport needed help from states to protect themselves and the competitions. State involvement has been crucial, but not without friction regarding the autonomy of sport. Because how can you help fight the dark side without becoming involved? The construction of WADA exists in this tension between sports autonomy and state involvement. As far as I know, WADA is the only organization in the sport field where the state and sport formally have equal power. We should both acknowledge that WADA managed to operate in such a landscape, but also see the challenges it leads to. We see challenges with states that use incentives to get what they want, and that they do not always act in the interest of anti-doping efforts. For example, Russia. But we also see that leaders can receive their institutions, their instructions, or act in their personal self-interest, even if they have great power and should act based on the interest of clean sport. Therefore, corruption and bribery and various forms of influence using money to get what you want are present in such a system. We believe that principles like human rights, democracy, rule of law can protect athletes and help both states, sport, and its leaders to be accountable and free from dishonest behavior and undue influence. So, what about fair procedures? Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights guarantees the right to a fair hearing. We cannot speak about anti-doping without mentioning specific cases. Let's start with the 23 Chinese swimmers tested positive for a banned substance, TMZ, in January 2021. Questions were raised about whether Chinada followed WADA's result management process and rules. We are now at the core of the basis for fair trial. Investigation into allegation of doping should be carried out by independent investigators without any interference from internal or external bodies. In this case, athletes were questioned but didn't know they tested positive, and the WADA investigation team wasn't aware of the case. It is the result management handling of the case which raises international attention, because the question is, was the process fair? What about Council of Europe and fair procedure in anti-doping? The Committee of Ministers has adopted recommendations. They refer, among others, to investigations, the right to be heard, the public nature of the hearing, access to document and evidence. Latvia hosted a seminar about this recommendation a few years ago. My impression was that improvements are necessary. When revising the code and the standards, we should work for the implementation of the principles adopted by the Committee of Ministers. The fair proceedings project should not be accomplished before we have amended and improved the judiciary in sport and anti-doping. We should start with a feasibility study and of a streamlined judiciary where we aim for a Supreme Court, in brackets, a well-known concept for Council of Europe. From time to time, we witness tough discussions in the field of anti-doping. There must be room for lively debates in the public sphere, including in the field of anti-doping. The downside here is a potential risk of retaliation against those who speak up. It is our task, including all of you, in a democratic system to ensure that this does not happen in the sport area. Integrity involves acting in accordance with truth and justice and using one's skills to promote the good in society. Acting for the good in society. That's what creates integrity. Dear representatives of the people, I do hope you take this approach also when you are dealing with sport policy, now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having added your so experienced point of view to our work today. And now we have our we have the last panelist for today, who is Roland Buchel. Sorry, didn't even start. So now, let me introduce you. Roland is member of the Swiss delegation to our Parliamentary Assembly, and his work as member of PACE, Committee on Culture, Science, Education, Media, has significantly contributed to the shifting of position on the Malta deadlock. His report, Time to Act, Europe's Political Response to Fighting the Manipulation of Sports Competition, formed the basis of PACE Resolution 2336 that was held in 2020, which calls for member states and EU to facilitate ratification of the Macaulay Convention. So, Roland, you have the floor. Thank you.
Grazie, Valentina. Well, first of all, I hope that I can read what I've written, because I did have eye surgery recent, but I think it should be okay. Dear friends of sport, dear friends of fair and honest sport, on the 17th of October, just 2.5 weeks ago, there was a match between two German football teams. It was a cup fight. After 57 minutes, one team was leading 7-0. At the end, the other team qualified for the next round. I want to believe that there was no cheating, and I want to believe, and I hope, that no one became rich because somewhere on this planet, he was placing bets on this game. And I was surprised when I saw a betting company, which is not legal, for example in Switzerland, was one of the main sponsors of the Alpine Ski World Cup opening in Sölden in Austria just 1 week ago. And yesterday I was surprised again. Why? I read that the most famous female Swiss football player actively promotes a betting site which is illegal in Switzerland. She plays in Italy for Juventus Torino, has 17 million followers on Instagram, and a boyfriend who plays for Juve, La Vecchia Signora, as well. And she's part of the Swiss national football team. Having mentioned these 3 examples, I have landed in a small place in Switzerland. It has less than 600 inhabitants. The name of the village has been mentioned sometimes. It's Macaulay. You know, or you have heard of that place because of the so-called Macaulay Convention. It's been mentioned several times today. In Macaulay, some people speak German, but most people speak French. That's why I change into French now. Mesdames, Messieurs, la Convention de Macaulay a célébré ces 10 ans.
Gentlemen, the Macaulay Convention celebrated its 10 years this year. It represents the will of the international community to fight against sports competition manipulations and to preserve the integrity of sport as a whole. The number of signatories is increasing. Spain ratified officially the convention in October, becoming the 12th state party of the Macaulay Convention. But there are 46 countries in our organization. 41 signed the convention. Now, recommendation 2178 of the PACE dates back to 2020. Time to act. Europe's political response to fighting the manipulation of sports competition seems to have played a role in mobilizing key states. It's important that we, members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, take more active role in promoting the ratification. We have to commit ourselves for the ratification process. The follow-up committee seeks to build bridges with other themes of the Council of Europe, such as corruption, money laundering, and even addiction. Sports betting is a scourge for athletes, but also for young people. Not only young people, by the way, a topic that was also addressed by the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media, and the Parliamentary Assembly's Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development. And the Council of Europe Sports Division is also active. We have also IOC and UEFA and FIFA and FIFA with the Global Integrity Program. How to say it? It was developed with the UNODC of the UN. It was launched on the 22nd of October, a few days ago, with the explosion of sports betting, Macolin Convention with international partners is important. But there is actually an obstacle. It's the absence of a political initiative by the EU. I am saying it. Well, we're not part of the EU. Now, for years now, people think that it should be included in the priorities of the Committee of Ministers in 2025. The Committee on Culture has dealt with issues related to media and sports. So media can also play a role in raising awareness on the manipulation of competitions, protecting, safeguarding the integrity of sport, educating the public and the athletes. And also to recall, let me remind the title of the recommendation 2178 of PACE, Time to Act, Europe's political response to fighting the manipulation of sports competition. This is the title of the recommendation. It's important to establish two relationships and to organize conferences such as this one. But there is something which is even more important. We need to act. Thank you. And everyone has to be involved.
So thank you, Roland. It was very useful to conclude with your complete recap on all the ratification and signature on the Macaulay Convention that we had in the last years, and also the need of cross-border and cross-sectorial cooperation. So now we have some time for having some questions, so I will open the floor to questions and sorry. So I will now open the floor to questions from our audience. Is there anyone who wants to open the floor? Costas.
Thank you for the excellent presentations. I think that what has been revealed today is that there are some sources in the manipulation of sports events. And the main source is what Mr. Mavrotas said, the bad management of betting, the misuse of betting, and of course the political and economical influence the sport have in our days. So I think that, and I would like your comments, the only solution is to regulate using strict norms, betting, the influence, the economic influence coming, or the political influence coming out from sports. Otherwise, if we stay just in education, which is one of the means, but we have to take some measures, and the measures are to regulate even hard the sources of the manipulation, which is the political and the economical influence resulting out of the sports. Thank you.
So maybe, George, I don't know if you would like to
Yes.
answer to that.
Okay. Okay. So, thank you, Kostas, for the question. And I think that what you have mentioned is, let's say, one of the main issues that we are dealing with in our follow-up committee of the Macaulay Convention, because what is true is that, let's say, the clubs in the lower divisions are the most vulnerable in reasonable betting. And if you are offered bets in this kind of, in the third category, or in the yellow cards of the fourth category, and so on. So it is, let's say, more or less expected that these people, they are vulnerable to being bribing, because they don't have salaries, they don't have any, let's say, conditions that they are proper for what they are doing. So for this reason, I think that we have to go to, let's say, to the direction of, except from the illegal betting, we must go to the direction of reasonable betting regarding the supply side, in order to diminish, to reduce the effect of manipulation sport competition, especially in the lower categories, in the low salary athletes. For example, in tennis, there's no only, let's say, Alcaraz and Djokovic and so on. There are thousands of players in the, let's say, in the lower categories that they are paying for their expenses, going from tournament to tournament. And in this case, we have cases that most of the cases that we deal with in manipulation sport competitions have to do with lower categories nowadays than in the top categories, that the salaries are good and the conditions are more or less good. So I agree that we have to take measures for reasonable betting from the supply side.
Thank you. And so we have Morgans who asked for...
Yes, thank you very much, Valentina, and thank you all for your interventions. My question will go to Jens from, not because he's Danish, but because he is representing Play the Game. And I actually think that the proposal you have come up with and you're working on in Play the Game on clearing sport, how you can create a kind of international entity against crime and corruption is very needed. But I would perhaps like you to foresee or elaborate on what will be the biggest obstacles in order to create such, and where do you see the most severe challenges, and what kind of responsibility will that give us parliamentarians if we should work together with you in supporting such a structure?
Thank you, Mogens. I owe you a beer in the bar tonight. I think the resistance is more or less the same as when I first proposed this at the Council of Europe and UEFA conference in Strasbourg in 2006. Governments get a little bit dizzy by thinking about the legal complication, all the time management and the costs in creating what is often considered as, and often called, another WADA. And when they call it another WADA, it's not meant as a compliment to WADA, unfortunately. Secondly, sports organizations fight as hard as they can to protect the territory, not to give up any kind of self-regulation. And this is probably one of the biggest battles. I think it would be in the best interest of sport itself to protect the important part of its autonomy and not the parts where sport does not have the powers to regulate and also is marked by internal conflict of interests. We have said to the international federations, go clean up your own corruption. But if the federation is governed by those who benefit from the corruption, why would they? We have seen very good benchmarking exercises, and I can say something very skeptical about benchmarking exercises because we are also doing them in good governance. But these good governance benchmarking exercises are exercises that deal with the paperwork, not the actual behavior of the organizations. So this is where the resistance comes from. What would be the argument for governments to invest in this? I see two arguments. I mentioned your human costs. We can also say there are quite a bit of financial costs. We have made some preliminary calculations saying that crime and corruption in sport costs hundreds of billions of US dollars, or you can say euros, on an annual basis. We will, of course, present those figures in more detail in early 2025 when we, expected February, launch our proposal with more detail. The other argument for governments is that the way that organized crime is supported through sports activities today represent a threat to the rule of law and the well-functioning of our societies. And that's why I see that you, as parliamentarians, have an underestimated role to play. I think very few people really realize that next to all the good people who work to do things well in the sports organizations, we have very sinister people who are protecting anything but the values of sport on a daily basis, enriching themselves with fortunes and compromising the values of sport. Thank you.
Thank you, Jens, also for underlining the role that the Council of Europe had their own countries on this so delicate issue. We had, yes, if you can introduce.
Okay, thank you. My name is Branislav Morenovic. I'm coming from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm a member of parliament there and also delegate in the Council of Europe. I'm going to be very honest to you. I think that unfortunately that we almost lost the game against the betting companies due to the financial and economical impacts, definitely. And I agree with the colleague who was first response from the Greek side. And but that's very, very strong lobby. And I don't see how we can find a way to fight against that lobby. But we are on a good way also to lose the game against illegal betting if we don't do something very serious, very strict. And that's why I'm a bit afraid, and I'm very glad that we have such a conference organized here in Athens about very, very important topic, because I think that betting, illegal betting, is a very serious addiction, especially to the vulnerable category of the population, to the youth. It's a modern drug. And that's the reason why we have to find capacities how to create really strong regulation, very strict and brave measures, which cannot be just national. It has to be national and also worldwide. Otherwise, we are going to be vulnerable from the other parts of the world about the especially illegal betting. And I don't have a special question, but I just have maybe Roland can say, because he was quite good with some examples from his country. Is it really possible that we find very, very strong measures how to beat, especially this illegal betting part online, which can create disaster for the humanity? Otherwise, I think that it's going to be a huge problem. For myself, I think the complete betting system, something which we have to fight more brave, with more courage than we have done until now, because I'm sure that it's not possible to be just a question of the members and representatives of some, I don't know, organization, but also governments have to be included in that. Otherwise, they're going to have probably some financial problems in their own countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Branislav, also for underlining the complexity of the problems we are facing. That, of course, also. And yeah, if you can one.
Thank you very much. I think you really touched the problem. And when I've just Angelo in front of me, when we did the research on the report some years ago, Mr. Ceferin, the president of UEFA, said that betting is the cancer of sport, worse than doping and worse than corruption. And he's probably right. The problem is, I think we do a lot, we try to do a lot. It's not only lawmaking, but the enforcement of the law is, I think, one of the big problems. Because each case in itself is not so big. And it involves so many countries. So if you have, let's say, classical mafia thing, so it's much easier maybe, or much, it seems to make more sense to these people to do something than on a betting case, which is so complicated, involving so many countries and people, bettors, the ones who are cheating on the field, and so on. I think that's one of the big problems, and I honestly do not know how we can solve that.
Chair, if I may?
Yes.
Yes, it is a very, very good question from Bratislav, and yes, I agree with Roland with what he said before about the cancer of the sport of being betting. But I want to emphasize that as governments, we have tools, and one of the, let's say, the most beneficiary things from the Macaulay Convention is the thing that it provides definitions. So the definition of illegal betting in the Macaulay Convention is quite straightforward and quite clear for what is illegal and what is legal for betting in the countries. And that's why it is very important for the countries to be more countries that have ratified the convention in order to apply some global standards, some global rules about what is legal and what is illegal betting. The other thing is that I agree very much with Ronald that we have to work on the side of, let's say, of responsible betting, of reasonable betting. I think that if we, as governments, if we put the rules, the betting ecosystem will follow, because from the manipulation of sport competitions, even the betting companies are losing money. So I think that we have to, let's say, establish this kind of tools that they are global, they are robust, and I think that in the case of manipulation of sport competitions, we are about 20 years behind regarding anti-doping. Where it was anti-doping in about 2000, we are now in manipulation of sport for sport competitions right now. So we have not lose the battle, but we have to have the proper weapons to give this battle.
Thank you. Also, Angelo was to add something to the discussion.
Grazie mille. Yes, I just wanted to add that I agree with my colleagues fully here, and the most important element is, talking from a point of view of the sport governing body, is that whilst on anti-doping we have our rules, we are doing the testing, we are doing the case management, match fixing and fight against anti-match fixing is where we need mostly the help of governments, of law enforcement agencies. We are sports organizations, so the tools at our disposal to do investigations, they stop at a certain level. So of course we have cooperation with Europol, with Interpol. We have our own set of investigations that is done by independent experts, but we are limited at a certain moment. And if there would be strong legislations in countries by obliging, for example, exchange of data in case a player has an account. Because, as we said before, it can be also that they are betting, like they have ludopathy, what we called. So it's not just for gaining money or for profit, but it's for passion, and then it becomes a sort of an illness. So if we could control more this through national legislation, then it would be easier also for sport governing bodies to monitor and to implement sanctions to this kind of situation. Because we have a lot on the monitoring. We can see the betting data market, but this doesn't say everything. In order to have a case where you can defend in front of a court, even if the standard of proof is low, because it's a comfortable satisfaction, so it's not a criminal burden of proof, so the criminal standard of proof, sorry, we still need more. And I think legislations are failing in Europe around that. Thank you.
Thank you. Jens also could.
Yes, just a short remark to underline the importance of the Macolin Convention here, because it actually offers the solutions. And it also offers leverage for giving a global dimension to this, of course, if it is ratified. A convention that is ratified by only 12 countries will not really scare anybody out there, particularly not in the big bulk of the illegal globing market, the big territory, which is Asia and Southeast Asia. If my good friend Alexander goes to China and say, you have to stop illegal betting, they will say, we have done so. Betting is prohibited completely in China, and yet it's the biggest illegal betting market in the world. And they won't be impressed. And that can go if the country by country, Europe negotiates with Asia country by country, nothing will really change. Then you are right, the battle will be lost. So I can only encourage that you go home to your governments and get the work done. And also that each time you meet an EU official, no matter from which department, you tell, and by the way, shouldn't the EU adopt the Macolin Convention, the sooner the better.
And Alexander to complete the...
Thank you. Just to remind you what I said about the Mars network. So it's not only a platform for exchanging, sorry. Mars network is not only a simple platform for exchanging information, best practice, and so on. One of the advantages is also that Mars really raised the attention of magistrates and prosecutors on the fact that corruption in sport is not something minor. You know, people are used to say, yeah, but it is just sport. From what we know, and all those people that are really seriously working on this topic, they know that there is a lot of money behind this. So this is the first I think, in my point of view, advantage of Mars network is that it really raised awareness among member states and also prosecutors and magistrates about the importance of this global problem. And the second quite positive advantage of Mars network is also that it informs all those people, magistrates and prosecutors, about the existing legal instruments. You know, we are here in the room among us. We all know what is Macaulay Convention. But if we start discussing outside of this room with the people, they don't know. Maybe they know where is Macaulay in Switzerland, but they don't know about the Macaulay Convention. So that's also a huge advantage, because in many countries they don't see the importance of this phenomenon of corruption and crime in the sports sector. And then just a short remark regarding the Macaulay Convention. If some EU countries haven't ratified the convention, it's not only because they want to protect illegal market. Just in a nutshell, just in few words, there are some legal internal EU obstacles to really ratify it. But let's be positive. Let's say that some of us are now analyzing the consequences of the decision taken by the Court of Justice in the Istanbul case, and it seems that, according to some of us, that it really opened the door to the ratification of this Macaulay Convention. So let's be positive.
Thank you. Luz?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all the different interventions. My reflection is regarding this part of the session, but also some things that were mentioned in the morning regarding the importance of education in sports, regarding the importance of education in terms of the different values that should be integrated in any project. The question is that values are not only a part of sport world. Values should be a part of any education system. It should be integrated in the curriculum as a whole, because you cannot make a parcel of values in sports and then in other subjects. So it has to be everything integrated. So if we talk about honesty, if we talk about inclusion, if we talk about equality, if we talk about the fight against doping and against any kind of illegal substance, it should be part of the curriculum. But we cannot take for granted that this is integrated in education systems, because it's not that way. Some countries may work on it, but it's always the same. It is considered as a cross-curricular area in terms of values. And then there is a counteract, very important, which is the impact of advertising, the impact of society, the impact of external issues that obviously have a great influence on the education of young people. So my question is, how do we integrate all these values, all this struggle for these new challenges, and also old challenges, because values are not only part of the future of sport, it should be also part of the past and the present, together with this influence, important influence of society, because obviously everything goes through education, but there must be a stronger compromise than just teachers and school projects. So in the end, any kind of challenge in society relies on education systems. So how can this be integrated in an easier and more effective way? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if there are Mr. Shanak.
I had only a very small question to Mr. Mavrotas. You are a very polite man. You speaking about those countries who ratified and signed. We should speak more and blame and shame the country which are not part of the Macaulay Convention. When I was chair of the Social and Health Committee, I take it over that I bring countries to the Medicrime Convention. And meanwhile, I blamed and shamed so many member states that they are now coming to this convention. You should really speak out who is not part and not who is part. I think that could be helpful. Nobody wants to see his country on the wrong side.
Thank you. So,
if I may say a few words on this, yes, there are some countries that they started the whole, let's say, the walk, the run, starting from Norway, Portugal, and so on. And now we are 12 countries. The last one was Spain about 2 weeks ago. I think that gradually they are seeing the benefits from being part of the Macaulay Convention. In the beginning, maybe they were more skeptical. There were these kind of legal obstacles that it was mentioned by Alexander, but I think that we cannot let the interests of one country in the European Union rule the whole world about manipulation of sport competition. I think that the other countries are also in this line.
thank you. I don't know if the other panelists want to add something to the last question we had, as we don't have any other request to intervention from the floor. We have now arrived to the end, I think, of the end one of this conference. So please let me thank our outstanding panelists and audience for a day full of meaningful and rich exchanges. We bring with us a lot of key learning, I think, a lot of answers and questions that remain to open. We have, of course, underlined the importance of cooperation and involvement of all the players. We have underlined how all these huge issues are global subjects, so we really require the intervention of everyone. And also it was very interesting understanding how these different issues, anti-doping and match fixing, are not all to the same stadium of awareness and legislation and comprehension, but require a differentiated approach because they are to a different level of acknowledgement by the different studies, by the different subject athletes, sports federation, and governing bodies. And in conclusion, I would like also to thank most warmly President Tassoulas for his invitation to this wonderful building that we all have visited today, also for allowing us to share the ceremony honoring the Greek Olympic and Paralympic athletes this morning, which was very touching and interesting. I thank also the Greek delegation to the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, the chairperson of that delegation, Dora Bakoyannis, and all the staff of the Parliament who have worked to make this event, such an interesting event, happen. A special thanks we also give always to our interpreters for this first day of hard work. And I look forward to our continuing discussion over dinner. This evening, also thank you to Dora for this warm invitation. And just a practical information I give you, there will be buses leaving at 7:30 p.m. in front of Hotel George V. So it's just here in front of the Parliament Square. So 7:30 p.m., 19:30 p.m. And the dinner then will start at 8 p.m. Thank you.